Okay, well, Phil, welcome to the Canadian Tactical Officers Association, copcast.ca. Um, I know a little bit about you. You're formerly with CSIS, with the Canadian Spy Agency. You've been away from that for a little bit, and I keep track of your posts on LinkedIn. What I'd like to speak to you about today is we've seen a lot of coverage in the media about something called right-wing extremism. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, Jimmy, thanks very much for having me on the podcast. It's a real honor to be with you. I do want to stress that, yeah, I did work for 15 years at CSIS and then 17 and a half years before that at Communications Security Establishment, the other spy agency nobody talks about in Canada, in signals intelligence. And when I worked at CSIS, my focus was on Islamist terrorism. So homegrown Canadians like the Toronto 18, Canadians who join groups abroad and kill people, et cetera, et cetera. So my professional experience does not focus on the far right per se, but as you mentioned, I've been retired for 6 years now, and I still do a lot of blogging and podcasting on terrorism. And as a matter of course, I have to follow what's happening on various ideological parts of the spectrum, not just the jihadis, which are the predominant threat around the world. But there's no question we have a problem with what we call right-wing extremism, or RWE. A bit of a grab bag, Jimmy. The right wing includes people we call white nationalists, white supremacists. It also includes neo-Nazis. It includes, for some, conspiracy theorists. Think of QAnon in the States. And it seems to be a rather, I would say, amorphous bunch of people with a bunch of different agendas and grievances that we all subsume under one heading, right-wing extremism. And I think the big question everybody wants to answer today is how much of a threat do they pose? How much should we be worried about it? And more importantly, I think from a law enforcement, security, intelligence perspective, how many resources should we devote to it? Because we put all of our resources in the jihadi bucket since 2001, and for reasons. I mean, we didn't make this stuff up. There were plots in Canada. There were plots around the world. They're still carrying out 99.9% of all terrorist attacks around the globe, but we cannot ignore the threat from the far right. So I think that you're seeing agencies like CSIS and the RCMP, as well as local law enforcement, coming up to speed a lot more with what the far right is, what it means, and how can we stop people from being hurt.
Do you think that we've spent the last year with COVID? We've clearly in troubled times, these groups seem to grow and infiltrate, things like anti-masking protest and whatnot like that, and try and change or morph that belief system into something of their own.
Yeah, they're very good at attaching themselves to other causes, we found. But it's interesting you raised COVID, Jim, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the world's not been the same for the past year. A lot of frustration out there at loss of employment, loss of income. We're all getting a little stir crazy, being held in our houses, kind of thing. I mean, as old retired guys, it's maybe not so bad for us, but it definitely isn't the best situation. Interestingly, there's been a lot of people talking about, will COVID lead to a greater rise in the far right, a greater rise in violent extremism and hate crime? And the answer so far seems to be no. Now, I just read a very interesting paper by an old colleague of mine who used to work with the security service. He and a fellow academic basically measured what we know about any rise in crimes, call them hate crimes, call them violent extremism, tied to COVID. And there's no evidence that that has actually happened, which points to a really important thing that I think listeners have to realize. You don't equate rhetoric with action. The vast majority of people who say stupid stuff online never do a damn thing about it. We used to joke at CSIS that most of the guys we were following, investigating under our act, the CSIS Act, couldn't organize a piss up in a bar. Had neither the intent nor the capability, and they were basically cowards, because anyone can sound dangerous online and anyone can sound like the big man on campus. But when push comes to shove, they don't do anything about it. So the challenge becomes, I think, how do you differentiate what I call the wankers from the real deal? And there's no one-to-one relationship. So it's really, really hard. There's no algorithm. There's no pattern. There's no tool you can use to say, okay, Jimmy's just a guy that likes to sound big, whereas Phil's the guy who's going to, carry a knife or a gun into a food court or whatever kind of thing. that's the challenge we're faced with right now. And what worries me, and this has been going on for a while, but it kind of peaked after the attack on the Capitol on January the 6th. There's been what I call a moral panic taking place largely in North America, also to the West to some extent, that it's all about the far right all the time. And I'm not dismissing that there are some pretty nasty people out there. And we've seen them here in Canada. Alexandre Bissonnette in Quebec City, 2017. Whatever the hell that Corey Herwin was at Rideau Hall. I have no idea what he was. You can even go to the shootings in Nova Scotia last year as well. I'm not trying to minimize that there's a threat out there, but I'm also trying to maximize that there's a threat out there. Because I think if we go down that road where all these people are potential violent extremists, we do a couple things. We give them far too much oxygen, which they don't need. We give them far too much credit, and we spread our resources very, very thinly. Now, you know, from law enforcement, you only got so many people to put on the streets on a given day. Which files do you focus on? And you also learn in security intelligence and law enforcement that if you move resources from A to B, it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And if you move them from A to B and A blows up, people say, well, where were you? Why weren't you following, Phil? And you know as well as I do, Jimmy, that in our business, our former businesses, you're only as good as your last failure. So you got to get it right all the time, because no one cares when you get it right. In fact, you may be blamed for getting it right. You know, you're overbearing, blah, blah, blah. Get it wrong, and the whole world's pointing fingers at you. You know, put a bit of story in. I'm a goalie. I play goal, and which accounts for, you know, one too many pucks to the head kind of thing. But being a goalie is kind of like being in law enforcement or security intelligence. When you make a mistake, a red light goes on behind your head, and 20,000 people are calling you a jerk.
Yeah,
right?
That's very true.
And I think that's the bane of working in. And I'm not trying to make excuses, or I'm not trying to complain. It's simply a reflection, I think, of what the challenge is that we're faced with. And so this is one more priority on the plate of law enforcement and security intelligence that already has had a very full plate. So where on the plate do you put it?
Yeah, well, I have a concern that is, again, through the media, that there's a lot of ambient fear that's unnecessarily created. And I think an educated public is a more secure public, if you will, in terms of their emotions and, you know, how they feel going out during the day, walking the street, going to that food court. Do you think that when the Proud Boys were put on the terror watch list, that gave them some credibility that they don't necessarily deserve, reference Canada specifically?
1000%. In fact, I put a podcast out saying how that was this really dumb move, which wasn't even justified according to my sources. You know, Jimmy, when you try to judge risk as an individual, you know, will I go to the food court today? Will I go take a plane to Florida? Will I drive across Canada? We have a very poor way of judging risk. So we're worried about the guy with a gun in the food court, or worried about a guy with a knife on Yonge Street in Toronto, or whatever, or a guy in a van barreling down Jasper Avenue in Edmonton, like a jihadi did back in 2018. What we don't realize and we don't accept is that, you know, you've got a greater risk stepping out of your door and tripping down the stairs and breaking your neck. Or you're at a stop sign and somebody decides to run the stop sign and hits your car. And, you know, as somebody who worked in terrorism for 15 years, and I worked on hundreds and hundreds of cases, and I've written 6 books on the topic, I never fear terrorism. And I've been all around the world. God, I've been to Sri Lanka, I've been to Kyrgyzstan, I've been to Mali, you know, as the jihadis are kind of knocking at the door. I mean, I don't take stupid risks, but at the same time, I recognize that terrorism isn't even a rounding error when it comes to risk. And I would say that the far right in violent extremism isn't a rounding error either. But you know as well as I do, it gets headlines. Look what just
Yes.
happened in Atlanta. Just was it this morning or last night?
Yeah, I just
Killing
saw
of 8
that this
people.
morning.
We don't know what happened. We know that people are dead. We don't know a motive yet, and yet already this is a hate crime. This is an act of terrorism. We have no facts yet, and yet people are jumping to conclusions. So I'm with you. An informed public is a better public. And it's thanks to people like yourself to get this information out there that we can actually inform Canadians on this is what risk is actually all about. So rather than, duct tape your house for the next 6 months because the terrorists are coming down the street, why not take a more rational approach to what risk is so that you don't, end your lifestyle and live in fear for the rest of your life.
Well, I think, again, if we look to Great Britain, certainly Northern Ireland, or if we look to Israel day to day, They just have a better way of living alongside of that threat, and they don't let it affect their personal lives. They still go out to restaurants. They still enjoy their lives. They, like you say, they don't duct tape their windows and this type of thing. I think we've got a little ways to go there in terms of educating the public about, what the potential is and how to move on, right? Like how to get things back to normal as fast as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, the Brits have that famous saying, "Keep calm and carry on," right? Which
Right.
dates back to the Second World War, and they were being bombed to smithereens by the Blitz, by the
Mhm.
Nazis, and yet they kept living. Buildings were collapsed, and people were living in tube shelters at night so they wouldn't get caught in the bombing. I mean, good Lord. I'm not trying to dismiss violence. I'm not trying to dismiss fear of violence, but you got to keep it in perspective.
Yes, perspective is
In a
everything.
country like Canada, we're very blessed. The chances of you being involved in a violent incident are so incredibly small. I don't know if you've heard a guy called Steven Pinker, Jimmy. He's a Canadian who wrote a very famous book a couple years ago called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And he has shown how violence in society writ large has decreased exponentially
Oh, certainly.
since we were chucking stones at each other.
Or if, in medieval times, I mean, if we look at you just look at the last century, two world wars, many conflicts around the world. Certainly, it has decreased.
Yeah, you mentioned medieval times. I mean, I think his stats are you had a 1 in 10 chance of dying violently if you lived in the 1300s.
Yeah.
Now your chances, again, they're not even a rounding error on a percentage. They're so incredibly insignificant. Not that any death is insignificant, but when you look at the whole picture, this is what we should be telling Canadians. Don't live in fear. I mean, don't be dumb. I mean, I'm not sure I'd walk through certain neighborhoods in Toronto at 2 a.m. on a Friday night, but don't live paralyzed by this notion that there's a guy waiting for me around the corner.
Right.
I don't live my life that way, and I worked in counterterrorism. I worked with some pretty bad dudes for the better
Yes.
part of 15 years, and yet I don't cower in my basement as a result.
Right. So, just again, I'll reference another conspiracy theory. The Christmas Day bombing, the gentleman had some concern over the G5 network. That seemed to be his motive in this. Again, internet conspiracy theories. Is the internet in and of itself problematic?
Yeah. So this is the Nashville bombings. I just read something yesterday on that. Actually, they still have no idea why he did what he did. They eliminated the link to AT&T, which he complained about. So they don't think it had anything to do with 5G. So he was making that stuff up. In the same way, Alec Manassian made up a lot of his story about being an incel.
Yeah, interesting case.
That's what the judge found. The internet is a curse and a blessing, Jimmy. I couldn't do my job today without social media, and because when I worked in Intel, I was like a kid in a candy store. I got cut off from Intel 6 years ago when I retired. I went through withdrawal for a month. Trust me, I curled up in my bed with a bottle of scotch because I realized I wouldn't have access to Intel anymore after 32 years. So the internet is great for guys like me and you to look at information, see what's going on, get different perspectives. And it's a curse because any idiot can post something. And you've seen how things have they adopt a life of their own through these algorithms. So you watch a video on YouTube about COVID, and then an algorithm says, "Oh, you like that video? You like this one?" And then you go down this rabbit hole. You go from COVID to COVID conspiracy to anti-vaxxers to Joe Biden's actually an alien kind of thing. So I think the key is, as consumers of information, I always tell people, pretend you're working as a spy or as law enforcement. And the number one rule about law enforcement and security intelligence is very simple. It's like real estate: corroborate, corroborate, corroborate.
Right.
If you're going to the same source all the time, that same source can be wrong. And you and I have both known human sources that lied, right? And so if you're going to be a smart consumer of information, you get your information from multiple sources, and then you learn who to trust and who not to trust, because some sources are inherently unreliable. The internet is in theory an unreliable source of information until you figure out who are the credible ones and who are the ones you should simply take off your browsing list. So I would never say don't look at stuff. I would just say look at stuff in an intelligent fashion so that you don't get duped and don't end up spreading these ridiculous theories that have no basis in reality.
Okay, so that's fantastic. So just to close up, what's on the radar?
Um, as I've been saying for a long time, if you want to just look at terrorism as a phenomenon, every day around the world, dozens of people are killed still by Islamist extremist groups like ISIS, like Al Qaeda and their affiliates. People are being beheaded in Mozambique. There was just an
Hmm.
attack in Niger last night. 15 people were killed. Afghanistan, dozens are killed every day by the Taliban. That seems to be the reality for most of the world. I think here in Canada, we're a very safe country in terms of violence. We'll see the odd plot here and there. Thankfully, we have very competent security intelligence and law enforcement agencies that do their investigations to stop things from going bang in the night. The odd one will get through. I think we just have to be aware, and I think as Canadians, we have to just continue the dialogue about what is this extremism, what does it look like, and what can we do about it collectively? Because it's not just a CSIS RCMP solution; it's a whole society.
See something, say something.
Yeah, and if you have that crazy uncle who spreads the COVID vax theories, have a conversation with them. Not to call him an idiot, but why do you think that way, uncle? And how can we get to some kind of agreement as to what's happening? So, bottom line, Jimmy, is that we live in a very safe society. We should be grateful for that, but still, you got to stand on guard for thee. And I think as Canadians, we have that obligation to, like I said, see it, say it, and not be afraid to deal with officials when you think something is going badly wrong.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Hopefully, when we're through the COVID, we can have you in the studio. That'd be fantastic. And be safe. And again, thank you very much for your time.
You too. You take care.